right, so that takes care of metadata. Now let's talk about augmentations. And augmentations is kind of weird. It's a NIEM specific concept that we came up with to deal with a problem we were having. And the problem is, what happens when you want to add things to something and you don't want to make it a special kind of thing? And that becomes particularly important when you start working with multiple domains. The way I like to think about augmentations is I like to think of them as bags, because that's really how they function. They function as bags of stuff. So here's a bag. This would be an augmentation. And I would put stuff inside. Now, it may be a pre-built bag. It might be, oh, there's already stuff in there. A domain already put stuff in there for me. Here's another bag. This is from a different domain. And, oh, there's stuff in there as well. And then if I want to make new stuff, if I want to add my own stuff to an object, then I've got a third bag. So here's my own bag. I could make this bag myself, put my own stuff inside. Perhaps pickles, but more likely exchange objects. I'll put those in the bag. And then what I can do is I can just hang them on the hook. Right? I'm the object. I'm going to add some new stuff to it. So we'll just hang these on the hook. There. Now, instead of making a special object, because I'm not a special thing, I'm still the same person, I've just got some added information added to me just by hanging these bags on my augmentation point, which in this case is my head. So in our UML here, we're going to work on the driver. We're going to work on their driver's license number and their email address. And the way that the business people have done this UML, which makes perfect sense to them, which is why, again, we start with the business level and we move to the NIEM level. It's very, very natural to think of the driver as being a special kind of person and the injured person as being a special kind of person. But what happens when you start trying to combine these things? And this is the same problem we have with roles. Do we have a injured driver person, a special kind of person who's an injured driver? That seems kind of weird. And it also seems weird when you start to think about smaller level objects. For example, we have this driver license number. That's going to be part of a driver's license. And we're going to add an email address to it. Does that mean we have a special driver's license email? No, it doesn't. It's not really a special kind of driver's license. We could do that. I mean, that would be perfectly fine to do, is take your driver's license and specialize it into a special driver's license that has email, and add email to the special driver's license, and have a special driver's license with email. But it's kind of screwy, because that's not really what you have. You're making something special, and you didn't really need to make something special. You really just want to add something to the driver's license. You don't want to make a special new thing. So that's where augmentations come in. Augmentations are a way of packaging up stuff and then just attaching them to an object without having to make a special version of that object. It's really nice and slick, it's powerful, easy to use, and it's just a lot cleaner than making specializations of something every time you want to add something to an existing object. Now, if you are making a special sort of thing, then yes, you want to specialize. But a lot of the times you're not. A lot of the times you're just taking an object that NIEM already has, and you just need that with a few extra things added to it. And instead of making a brand new, your custom object, we have a mechanism for just adding things to it, and it's called augmentations. So augmentations, they're bags of stuff. They're just bags. It's a bag of stuff. Think of it as a grocery bag. You've got a bag, and it's full of stuff. And what we do in NIEM is we pack those bags with things that we think people will want to use in other domains. So the justice domain goes, hey, these are things we think other people would want to use in other domains, so we're going to put them all in a bag so they can just grab the bag and go. It's a pre-packed bag. Then we have something called augmentation points. And the augmentation points are hooks to hang the bags on. You hang the bags on the hooks. And where are the hooks? Well, the hooks are in every single complex object in NIEM. Everything in NIEM that can hold other stuff has augmentation points. And what's cool is I can just go randomly pick an object pretty much. I'll pick what, I mean, we can look at person. We've looked at person a lot. Let's look at not person charge, just person. If we go ahead and look at person, after a suitable pause. SSGT does a lot, so. And we open up person, and at the bottom of person is, well, a lot of person stuff, maybe not the right choice. Whoops. Missed it. It's somewhere. Oh, there it is. Alphabetical person augmentation point. Right there. This is a hook. It's a hook to hang an augmentation bag on. Notice it's abstract. It's the head of a substitution group. And what's in that substitution group? Any of the augmentation bags. So if I see something in NIEM in an augmentation bag and I want to add it to a person, I can just take that bag and substitute it for this augmentation point. This is a hook. The augmentation points are hooks. But I wanted something else. I wanted a vehicle. Let's go do it in Wayfair. We go to vehicle. I'm going to do exact name. Here's our vehicle. And vehicle, if we go scroll to the bottom, alphabetically the augmentation points are at the bottom, but in the actual list in the sequence, they're at the end. And here we have there's a vehicle augmentation from Justice that's set up to replace that vehicle augmentation point that's in vehicle. And there's a screening vehicle augmentation from screening, which also can be put on that hook, be put on the vehicle augmentation hook here in vehicle. So these are two bags that are pre-built, pre-packed with stuff, and either one or both, if you set the cardinality for augmentation point right, can be hooked on this vehicle augmentation point and trivially added to the vehicle object. Let's go back to the notes. Let's tackle driver's license. So the other examples here, incident has an incident augmentation point. They all do. Everything has an augmentation point to it. So anything complex, anything that holds other objects, so that you can hang metadata on them. But what augmentations are really good about is extending objects to meet your needs. So you've got stuff you want to add to an object. We can do that by making an augmentation bag, putting your stuff in it, and then just saying, hey, this bag of stuff is replaceable for the hook in whatever item we want to put it in. So in our case, we can very easily add email address to a driver's license by using the hook and driver's license and putting the bag on it. So let's go do that. So let's go find this stuff. So the first thing we ought to do, though, I'm telling you what we're going to do, but really the first thing we ought to do is we ought to go find out for ourselves, right? We ought to search for it. Let's make sure driver's license doesn't have an email address, because maybe it does. I don't know. It may have it. So let's go look. We can search for driver's license in the SSGT, and we get a driver license conviction and a driver history withdrawal. We don't get driver's license. And if we look closely, we'll realize, hey, that says driver license singular. Oh, yeah. Now we remember, oh, yeah. Tom told us to drop the endings off things. Don't do plural versions. So we'll just try driver license. Let's try driver license instead. And now we get stuff. We get there's a crash driver license. That sounds good. That sounds exactly what we want. There's also a driver license without the crash. We should probably think about which one we want and which one we need and which one suits our purposes. We'll see that driver licenses of a driver license type, crash drivers of crash driver license. We open up crash. We'll see there's some authorizations and category stuff that, well, this doesn't help us because we just want the driver license number. So we're not doing anything special. And if we do a show inheritance, we'll see it's just based on driver license. So this is just a plain old driver license with some things we don't need added. Okay, so it's not immediately better than a plain old driver license to us. The other thing we should look at is what are these inside of, right? The crash driver license is probably inside the crash driver, and that would be perfect for us, right? So let's check on that. Let's check on it. We don't want to just assume it. Let's check on it. Let's do it in Wayfair. Wayfair is good at that. Driver license. Oop. Didn't spell it right, though. There we go. We'll search for that. So let's open driver license in a tab and look at crash driver license. And crash driver license is, of course, inside. Oh, wait a minute. Driver license isn't contained in anything. That's odd, right? That's really odd. What about just plain old driver license, not the crash version? Driver license goes inside all of these things, including right here, crash driver type. in crash driver. That's really odd, isn't it? That's not what you would expect. You would expect a crash driver to have the crash driver license inside, not a plain driver's license inside. Why is that? And when I ran across this, and I did run across this doing training, because I'd been using driver license, I hadn't even realized there was a special crash driver license, because there's 13,000 things in NIEM. I don't know them all. I know a lot of them, but I don't know them all. And I ran across it in training and went, that's really odd. And I went back and talked to the fellow technical people who work on NIEM, in particular the person who handles content that comes out of the NBAC and the domains. And I asked her, and she said, that's how the domain submitted it to us. That's how they wanted it. They didn't want the crash driver license in there. They wanted the normal driver license. And so you do what the domain wants, because they're the stewards. It's not up to, this is a lesson in how NIEM works. It's not up to the technical geeks who are doing the behind the scenes work to make these decisions. And I'm one of those technical geeks. It's not up to us to make the decisions. It's up to the NBAC, the Business Architecture Committee, and the stewards of the domains to make those decisions. And now they may revisit this. We put this on the list of, are you sure this is how you want it to be? But this is how they submitted it, this is how they wanted it, and so that's how it is. And that's the explanation. The explanation is that's how the domain wanted it. But the lesson there is that it is up to the domains what goes in this model. This model is not driven by technical geeks in a room doing what they think is best. It's done by people in the real world who really work with this data and do these exchanges on a daily basis to make these decisions. So that is why it's driver license and not crash driver license inside a crash driver, oddly enough. Let's go back to, well, let's look here. We've got driver license up. So let's check if it has any sort of email. Got enhancement indicators, commercial class codes, a lot of commercial stuff we don't care about, permit stuff, permit quantities, withdrawal stuff, driver license card identification. Oh, an identification that's affixed to the raw material. This is the driver license, the rectangular thing with all the stuff on it. So that's really, that's what we're looking for, that for the actual driver license number. If we look in Wayfair, go below the fold and see everything the driver license can contain, we're going to note that there's also a driver license base type. And the base type provides more, it's structured into two layers. It just breaks it up. And that provides driver's license identification. So that's the concept of the card, not the actual card. You can use either one depending on what you want. Expiration dates, issuing dates, a person to which it's assigned. So there's just a lot of different things there, but yeah, there was an email address. No email address. Well, that's not surprising. It's kind of an odd concept. It's not something anybody actually does, but somebody could, and that's why we've done it as part of the demo here. Now, we should also take a look at structure. So again, you can go bottom up or top down. We know that here's a driver's license, and it goes inside of a crash driver. And we've already played around with this, but we know the crash driver goes inside a crash vehicle. This J driver is contained in these types, crash vehicle being one of the things it's in. And then a crash vehicle goes inside a crash. So we see that structure. We understand that structure because we just went from the bottom up. Again, in the SSGT, you can do it from the top down. How is my crash stuff set up? Well, let's go take a look at crash and do the exploration. Here's crash. There's things inside of it. There's a crash person. But not a driver. It's just crash person. There's crash vehicle. We open that up. There's a crash driver inside of there. We open that up. There's a driver's license inside of there. And so we've found the structure. And again, you can go either direction. You can start from the bottom, driver's license, and see what it contains. And if you're going bottom up like that, use Wayfair. Wayfair is good at showing you that information. But if you're going top down, I want to start at crash and just explore crash and work my way down to find the things I need. SSGT is better for that. You can go either direction and either will work. All right, so we need the email though. All right, so we found the driver's license. We see that there's no email in it. We need the email. Well, let's go find out about email. We'll just do a search for email. And we get a bunch of things. We have email, but we see contact email. That sounds better. This seems like this is just email out on its own. But we have contact email, ID. Now here's another one of those representation terms where the end of the name of the element tells you what kind of stuff it holds. In NIEM, ID is an identifier. That's a string. That's a string of numbers. Your social security number in NIEM is an ID identifier. This is not ID identification. The identification object in NIEM is the whole thing. Like your driver's license card is the identification. The driver's license number is the ID on that identification. So this is a contact email ID. This is a string. This is the actual email address. If we take a look at it, we'll see it goes inside of a number of things, including things of contact information type. So we see right here it's a string, just up at the top. It's a string. Cool, that's what we want, but what does it go into? We could use it just as is, but let's think ahead. Let's be smart about this. It goes in things of contact information type that replace a contact means abstract. Let's learn a little bit more about that. Here we go. Contact means abstract, a data concept for a means of contacting someone. That's what we want. It can be replaced by a lot of different things. A contact email ID, that's what we want. Now, when I talk about thinking ahead, we could just add a contact email ID to the driver's license, but there's some other choices here, and there's that contact means abstract. And what happens in the future when you want to add like a instant messaging ID, instant messaging address? What if you want to add things like that? What if you want to add social media accounts? What if you want to add a social media account, an IM, other sorts of contact information? If I just add the contact email ID, then I have to do more work later. If I do a next version of this message spec, I'll have to do more work. If I use the contact means abstract inside contact information, then all I need to do is add a new element with the right substitution group head to substitute for this. So there's a simple way and there's a slightly more complex way. But the more complex way will pay dividends over time as things change and as new different things get added to the driver's license. So we're going to do it that way. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use this contact information to hold our contact email address. And then the contact information is what we're going to add to the driver license. So let's look at the schemas for that. So first we have the element. Here's the existing driver license element in NIEM. Driver license type. Again, we could specialize driver license type and make a special kind of driver's license that contains an email, but that's not really what we're doing. We're just adding something to a driver's. It's still a driver license. We're just adding one new concept to it. So here is the definition for a driver license type. It's pretty long. It doesn't quite fit on the screen. But here's driver license type here. It extends that base type that we looked at when we looked in Wayfair. And as we go down, we see all the normal stuff. Well, here's the driver's license card identification. This is the actual driver's license card itself. So we're going to use that. And here is that augmentation point. There's a hook here. There's a hook in driver license for us to hang a bag of more stuff. And that bag of more stuff is going to be the contact information. So while NIEM has a bunch of predefined bags, augmentation bags, and we've looked at some of those, we're going to make our own. We're going to make a bag called license augmentation. This is a bag to hold the contact information. EXT is the nickname we're going to use for our own namespace. We're creating something new now. We're going to see more creating new things in a little bit. This is just our first peek at it. But this is really why you have augmentations and why you use augmentations. So we are going to use this as our example. EXT is the nickname for our own namespace. We're going to have our own schema with our own stuff in it, with its own namespace, and that's where we're going to put our new things. And the nickname for our own namespace is going to be EXT for extension. Doesn't have to be EXT. It could be Fred if you want. It could be Sally. That would be fine, but we're going to use EXT. It makes a little more sense. So in our own file now, we're going to make a driver license augmentation. So here's a license augmentation type. This is our type. We're making this. This is new. But it's not based on license type. We're not making a new kind of driver license. We're making a bag. So we're going to use, there's a base augmentation type. Again, what does it do? It adds the IDs and refs to a container. And the only thing we're going to add to that is NIEM's contact information. So we're making a bag. We're putting contact information into it. Contact information has that contact means abstract inside, and that can be replaced by the email address. Then we're going to make an element, license augmentation. That's the actual bag of the type we just created. And remember, now we're in our own namespace, so it has an ext prefix to say, hey, this is our license augmentation type and our little namespace we're making here. Give it a substitution group head of driver license augmentation point. So this is the bag hook. This is the hook for the bag. This is the bag. This defines what's in the bag. This is the hook that we're hanging the bag on. And this is what's in the bag. And we put it all together. Oh, but before we put it together, I just want to show you the augmentation type. This is just adds, I keep saying these things add infrastructure pieces. Here's just an example. Here's what it looks like. It adds the ID, adds the ref, it adds a URI one, which we haven't talked about. People don't use it really, but you could use it to give each and everything a globally unique ID. This ID is internal to a document. This is a globally unique ID. And then some other namespace stuff that we don't typically use. And the resulting instance document looks like this. Plain old J driver license. Not a special version of driver license. This is a plain old Justice driver's license. It's got a card identification inside. We looked at that in the SSGT, and inside there is the identification ID. And that's the string. So that's just a made up driver's license number. We know now that representation terms ID on the end of a name means that that's a string. It's an identifier. It represents an identifier, and it'll just be a string. And then after that is our license augmentation. This is our bag that we made, and it's replacing the hook that's already there. There's already a J driver's license augmentation point there, and we're just replacing it with our bag. Here's our bag, license augmentation. Here's what we put in the bag, contact information. And here's the contact email ID, the actual string that is the email. There's Peter's email address. It's not a real email address. Please do not try to email Peter at that address. It doesn't exist. He doesn't exist. He's dead. He's fictional and dead. So please don't email that address. But that is how we can add the email address to an existing driver's license without making a new driver license, without making a new special driver's license. Note this is still just a J driver license. This is the plain old driver's license. We've just added a bag with additional contact information. Now we could make this a little easier. We could leave off the contact information and just add the email address, but then we don't have quite the same flexibility as we do if we do the whole contact piece. Either way would work fine. Equivalent JSON just looks the same as the XML. Driver's license card identification we found while exploring driver's license. It's got an identification ID inside, which is the actual driver's license number. And then here's our bag. Here's the thing we put in our bag. Here's the thing that goes inside the thing we put in our bag. That's the email address. And there, we've added an email address to the Justice driver's license. We haven't had to specialize. We haven't had to make a new one. Now, I've been kind of pounding on that a bit, and we will see in a couple of sections why it's good to not make specializations when you don't have to. Right now, you just have to trust me that this is better than making a special driver's license. It's better semantically just thinking about it, but it's also better in terms of work you have to do. And we'll see more about that coming up. So let's check our artifacts. So we've added a bunch of stuff now because the driver's license was inside. Here's the driver's license. It's inside the crash driver, which we found was inside the crash vehicle, which we found was inside the crash. So we have to add all these pieces, and we get this whole section here being added because we're adding that crash driver and the driver's license. And so the vehicle, the vehicle's not in our UML. It's not in our UML, but it's part of the NIEM structure. The crash driver goes inside a crash vehicle, which goes inside the crash. And so we replicate that structure. We're grabbing the whole NIEM structure to work here. So that's that part. Let's go take a look at our mapping spreadsheet. And we've added a lot of blue for this too. because we've added some stuff and we've added some structure around that. So again, we have the crash vehicle. We had to make a blank line for it. So line 15, new line. Again, I'm leaving those blank on the left specifically to show how much empty space we need to add as we add structure for NIEM. It holds a crash driver. There's a role of person because crash driver is a role. And then there's a driver's license inside the crash driver. There's the card identification. That's the actual driver's license card. It has an identification ID. That's a driver's license number. It's a driver's license augmentation point. I want to note that down because we need that, right? It comes with the driver's license. That's part of the mapping. We have a bag we created to put on the hook that is the augmentation point. It contains NIEM core contact information, which has the contact means abstract, which gets replaced by the contact email ID. Over here, we've put the types out of NIEM, except this one is something we've created new. We know it's new because it has that ext prefix on the front. And now finally we put something in base type. We finally created something new, and I want to tell myself, what is that new type based on? Is it based on something in NIEM? It might be something in NIEM. In this case it is. Might be based on some other type I've made, which would be listed elsewhere in the mapping spreadsheet. The contained in are all the usual. You got the driver's license inside crash driver, the card itself inside driver license. Let me see, crash driver inside the vehicle, the role of person in the crash driver, driver's license in the crash driver, the card identification in the license, the actual ID itself is in the card, and then we do the bag stuff as well. I can go through each one of these, but I think you've seen me go through each one of these enough. Again, I will repeat, if these two columns seem like a pain and you don't want to use them, don't use them. I use them because they help me with tools I've written. You don't need to use them if you don't want to use my tools, or even if you do. You know, it's up to you. It's your mapping spreadsheet. Again, I've got this marked as a reference because this is the role of person. So I'm marking this so that I know this person here, this role of person inside crash driver is not going to actually hold the person, but rather it's going to reference the person object elsewhere. It's going to reference that single Peter Whimsy object that we've created. I've got definitions for everything, cardinality, and then we've got our exchange path. Whoa, exchange path is getting long, but you can see it gives you the whole list of the structure on how you get to a particular piece of information. You know, contact email ID. Where is that in the structure? How do you get to it? Well, you start at JCrash and you go into crash vehicle, then into crash driver, then into driver's license. Then there's an augmentation point that gets replaced with our bag, our license augmentation, which then has a contact information, which contains a contact means abstract, which gets replaced by contact email ID. Whew, it's a long one. That's a long one. But it's important to have all that. Now you know how that's all set up. You don't want to have to remember that or just hope you get it right. This way you've got it all written down. This is also why the column for the exchange path I always put to the far right. It's the last column because I don't like to wrap them. They aren't going to wrap cleanly. So this way there's nothing else beyond here. Right? This is the last column. There's nothing more. So it's okay if it gets really long. That's fine. So that's I always make that the last column because I know it's going to get extremely wide. Okay, our next topic, which is, these are a little bit disconnected. Talked about code tables, talked about augmentations. Now we're going to talk about external standards. They don't fit together. They're three separate topics, but we're running through these kind of final NIEM topics before we get to creating your own information. And they're just a catch-all for these last three topics. So now we're going to deal with crash location coordinates. So things to know. NIEM supports external standards if they're XML. If you've got an XML standard out there, there is a way to use it in NIEM. The way to use it is to wrap it up in something that is NIEM conformant. You take an external standard, you wrap it up in a NIEM conformant adapter. We call them adapters, they're just wrappers, and they wrap it up in NIEM conformant stuff so that you can use it in NIEM. Now our example, we're going to deal with this location stuff. So let's take a look. And we have to take a look in the SSGT. Wayfair doesn't do external standards. Wayfair's philosophy is it's an external standard and I'm here to teach you about NIEM, so I don't care. The real reason is because it's hard to add support for them, and so Wayfair doesn't, but the SSGT does. So let's go back to the SSGT and let's clean up our tabs a little bit. All right, so let's go back to crash. And let's go ahead and open up crash and start thinking about the location of the crash. So we got crash, and we're looking, and we're looking, and we see, and we get down to the bottom, and we go, oh, there's the location. It's not a special crash location, because what's special about the location where a crash happens? Nothing other than the crash, and there's all sorts of other information for the crash. So it's just a plain old location. We haven't looked at location yet, though, so it's high time we did, because it's a very common concept. That's why it's in NIEM Core. Let's open it up and see what we have inside. We've got addresses, areas, an augmentation point. That's our hook. If we want to add things to it, a category. We have location, contact information, descriptions, direction text to it, how high it is. Geospatial coordinate abstract. That's what we want. We want latitude and longitude. And we look around and see a few more. Make sure we don't have latitude and longitude here. Now, why do we want latitude and longitude? Because that's what's in the UML. That's what the business people told us when we were doing the requirements analysis up front. Different places might do it different. They might use like the location an address of some sort. But we just, for our purposes, the business people, the fictional business people who made that UML, said we're going to use a latitude and longitude. Then we just punch that into our GPS and be good to go. It's an abstract. So it's a concept. It's representing the concept of geospatial location. And it's got multiple representations for what that looks like. Let's take a look at those representations. So we see a number of different things. We see location 3D geospatial coordinate and location 2D geospatial coordinate. Well, in our example, we're going to say 2D. We don't care the altitude of the crash, as long as it was on the ground. I mean, we don't care if it was on a hill or a valley or what. So we're just going to do 2D. Let's open it up and see what that's about. And it's got a latitude coordinate and a longitude coordinate. A few other things too, but latitude and longitude. Let's open each of those up. The latitude is made up of a latitude degree value, a latitude minute value, and a latitude second value. So degrees, minutes, and seconds, typical. If you just want just decimals, then you would just use the degree and use the decimal one there. Longitude's exactly the same. Degree value, minute value, and second value. And those are just numbers. So NIEM's got this. NIEM has this. It's broken up a bit, right? It's not just a string with the latitude and longitude. It's broken up, but NIEM has all this. But what if you wanted it just as a string? What if you were into geospatial stuff and you like to use that? You knew there was a standard out there called GML for geospatial markup language. You wanted to use that instead. Well, NIEM has that included as an external standard. So we're going to use that as our example so you know a little about external standards. It's important to learn how the location stuff works, but it's also important to know about external standards. So if I open up this geospatial point here, this is our adapter. Remember I said external standards are wrapped in NIEM conformant adapters. This is the adapter. And inside of that adapter is a point. And this point is defined as a coordinate. This is a geospatial markup language point, a GML point that locates a point on the globe. This is the latitude and longitude. Now, there's only so far, you can't explore this external standard in NIEM. You can only explore individual chunks that get wrapped up. If we want to take a better look at this, we have to go look at the schemas. So we can do that because we have them in the notes. So here's our example. This is the location geospatial coordinate abstract. We just looked at it. It contains a location geospatial point, which in turn contains a point. Let's look at those in the schema. So here's location type. So this is what NC location is of. We just looked at this in the SSGT. We see a lot of location information, but when we go down, we eventually see this one, the location geospatial coordinate abstract. That's the one we want. We want a geospatial coordinate, a place on the globe, the latitude and longitude where the crash occurred. So that's the type. Inside of that was that location geospatial coordinate abstract. Abstract equals true. It's just the head of a substitution group. One of the members was that location geospatial point. So here we are, we're edging close to the external standard. there's a location geospatial point. Here it is. It's of geopoint type. It substitutes for the location geospatial coordinate abstract that is inside the location. Now we are still in NIEM. This is still NIEM. This is a NIEM adapter though. It's a NIEM adapter for an external standard. If we take one more step, we're going to be leaving. So here we are. Here is that point type. Okay, so again, this is the location geospatial point of a point type. These are adapters. So we're still in NIEM, but just barely. This is still NIEM point type. So this is the type. It has this app info that tells tools that this is an adapter to an external standard. This is still NIEM, but it's just barely. It's right on the edge. It's got this definition. It's of object type. It's just an empty container, and it has one thing inside of it, GML point. So point type, this is still a NIEM. This is an adapter. Uses NIEM stuff like object type. But GML, this is the external standard. So this is a wrapper. NIEM conformant type that contains a non-NIEM element, this point. What does a point look like? Well, we can go and actually take a look at point. We can pull up that external standard. NIEM comes with the standard as part of the distribution. You can go look in the standard all you want. But this is no longer NIEM. This is an external standard, an existing external standard out there, which does not follow the same rules as NIEM. It's got an element of its own point type. It has its own substitution group for doing things, but I don't know about that. It's an external standard. Here's the type for it. It extends some primitive in GML. Again, I'm a NIEM expert. I'm not a GML expert, so I don't know what these are about, but we can use them in NIEM through that wrapper. It has a POS and a coordinates element inside. And knowing all that, we can create the XML for it. Here's our location. Here's that geospatial point. And again, the geo tells us this is an adapter namespace. This is still NIEM, but it's wrapping up non-NIEM stuff. And then in GML, there was the point, and it had a POS inside, and I know very little about GML. So what I did was I went and searched for examples of the GML point object and how it works. And I found this nice example. This is the POS. This marks a place on the map. It has an attribute to say if it's 2 or 3 dimensions. It has a name, which is a unique identifier for it. It has a latitude, and it has a longitude. Whoops, and a longitude. And they're just decimals. It doesn't do degrees, minutes, and seconds. It just does the decimals. And this is how you would use this external standard POS element to mark the location on the globe inside this location object, if you wanted to use the external standard. It's a very simple example, and if you're curious, that's the latitude and longitude for the Statue of Liberty, because that was the example I found. So hopefully you don't have a car crash at the Statue of Liberty, but this is actually how GML represents the position of the Statue of Liberty, and that's the actual data for it. But that was the example I found, so that's the example we get. Now when it gets to JSON, it doesn't make any sense to tell you what to do, because I can tell you how to do JSON stuff in a NIEM conformant way because I have NIEM rules, but I can't tell you how to do non-NIEM conformant XML in JSON because it's not NIEM conformant and the rules don't apply. I took the XML above, loaded it in my XML editor, and auto-generated it out to JSON, and this is what I got, which was the location, the geospatial point, the GML point inside of that. So again, this geospatial point is the adapter. This point object is from the external standard, and then it's just here's the ID, here's the POS with the attributes, and then the actual value. And that's fine. There's no rules for it. That would be just fine. Now, having said all this about external standards, it's important to note that you will probably never ever use them. Okay? You probably won't. I don't see them used in the real world really ever, but the capacity is there, the capability is there, and if you're doing GML stuff, if you're doing geospatial stuff, that standard already has wrappers for it and it's ready to go. So if you're doing geospatial stuff, You could use that within NIEM quite easily. Other standards could be included, but you'd have to build your own wrappers. So it's important to know about this, but don't stress over it because it's not something you're likely to run into. So here in our text version we've been building, I did it both ways. I did it external standard wise, geospatial point, and the POS object, and I did it with the NIEM one as well. The location 2D geospatial coordinate with a latitude. I just grabbed degrees and minutes. I don't really care about seconds, and did the longitude with the degrees and the minutes. The NIEM version is a little more built out, but they both work just fine. And if we go look at the mapping spreadsheet, we'll see a lot of added stuff, partially because I did it both ways. But all we had, this is where sometimes NIEM feels like it really wants to punish you, because all we wanted was the latitude and longitude of a location. That's all we wanted. But to do that in NIEM, that meant grabbing the location object, grabbing the location geospatial coordinate abstract inside of it, and then either using the external standard, these three pieces, or using all of these pieces down here, the NIEM style, mapping all of those to get the latitude and the longitude. So in NIEM, NIEM likes to parse things out. NIEM doesn't want to just stick a latitude and longitude on a line with space in between. It likes to parse them out so there are separate elements describing each piece. You see that with the name as well. You could do a full name, but NIEM would really like you to break it out into first, middle, and last name. The contained-ins are the same. Here is our location goes inside a crash. That abstract, the geospatial coordinate abstract, goes inside the location. Same as down here. Then the next guys down, both substitute for that head, that substitution group head. And if we look at like the 2D one, you've got the latitude and the longitude both substituting for the geospatial coordinate abstract. Then you've got the latitude and you've got the degree value inside the latitude and the degree value for the longitude inside the longitude. It all fits together. Here I mark these as external. As a note to me that, hey, I'm using external standards. Maybe at some point if I do have a tool that runs against the spreadsheet, but I could use that tool, could then filter out external stuff because it doesn't support it. I don't currently. I normally just delete it from the spreadsheet, but I could. So I just added there so I know. I've got definitions. The external standard doesn't really give definitions, so I didn't put any there. And then we have our exchange paths, which are getting quite long, especially the NIEM style down here. It's a crash with a location inside, a geospatial coordinate abstract inside that, a 2D geospatial coordinate replacing the abstract, a geographic coordinate longitude inside of that, and then in this case the longitude minute value inside of that. Very broken down because it's NIEM, a lot of structure there. And so that's the exchange path showing all that.